I think the fascination that people could behave so violently and commit such abhorrent acts.
You can flirt with danger, but you don't get hurt. It's just that sensation.
Serial was responsible, I think, for the complete renaissance of podcasts, full stop. So Serial, I think, was a game changer.
True crime. It's having a moment. Seems like there's always a new podcast or Netflix series up for discussion. Serial is probably one of the first that springs to mind when we think about the genre. Sarah Koenig's record-breaking podcast, which investigated the murder of a Baltimore teenager, undoubtedly paved the way for a slew of true crime media. A 2018 academic study found that almost 75% of true crime podcast listeners are female, despite the fact that most of these stories feature violence against women. I'm speaking to some self-confessed female true crime fans to find out what it is they love about the genre so much.
Hi, I'm Mars, and I'm a big fan of true crime.
Hi, my name is Laura, and I'm just a little murderino. Partly I think it's the shock behind it. Like, I went through a bit of a phase, listening to Case File in particular, where I got really interested in people who murdered like a number of members within a family, because you have to wonder why someone would do that. There's just so much you can kind of dig into. It's never ever just black and white.
I've always been interested in like the human psyche, how people behave and what it is that makes them behave in that way. And also there's all different types of a crime. You know, to me, when you look at just murder, it's like there's many ways that you can kill someone, but each way has a different kind of thinking behind it.
This is a service to Media City UK. The next stop will be Media City UK, where this service terminates.
I want to speak to someone who makes true crime podcasts, so I've come to Media City in Salford to speak to the BBC's Chris Warburton. Chris worked on the End of Days podcast, which looked at the victims of the Waco cult, and previously he produced Beyond Reasonable Doubt, which studied the murder of Kathleen Peterson, famously known as The Staircase.
Yeah, so I think it's about 4 years ago, and we did the Beyond Reasonable Doubt podcast, which was, I suppose, what you might regard as, more traditional true crime. It fits in with the mould of all of the stuff that's been massive on Netflix or Serial and all those kind of things. And in fact, some people sort of said, this is like the British equivalent of Serial, I think, because we were sort of following the case as we went, in a way.
The Staircase refers to the death of Kathleen Peterson, who was found lifeless at the bottom of her stairs. Her husband, Michael, was convicted of her murder. The case gained a huge media following, as well as public speculation as to whether Michael Peterson really killed his wife.
Kathleen Peterson was 48 years old when she died in a pool of blood at the foot of the stairs at her home in Durham, North Carolina in December 2001. That much is a sad fact. What happened in the minutes and hours before
and then that followed up, we started working on End of Days a couple of years ago, which took the best part of a year to complete. So I've been doing the thing for around 4 years, and it kind of was a bit of a bolt from the blue, really, because I was just sort of asked to get involved with it, and all of a sudden people are saying, this guy's the true crime guy, and you're like, I suppose I am.
Is that it? That's the house. That is the house, and it is enormous. It is absolutely huge. It's strange for me, after having read so much and watched so much about what is alleged to have happened inside that house. It's amazing to find.
Serial was responsible, I think, for the complete renaissance of podcasts, full stop. You can almost bring it back to when Serial came out, and I was probably a part of that consumer base as well. You had the kind of early stage of podcasts, which was very much kind of organic and, people in their garages and all that kind of stuff. And then Serial came out, and that just seemed to reignite the whole thing. And that's when the big boys got in, and you had Acast and you had the BBC, and everybody thought, hold on, we need a piece of this pie. So Serial, I think, was a game changer.
I asked Chris if the gender of the victims matters to him when choosing a story to tell.
Don't really see where that would necessarily have a relevance in terms of how I would approach it. With Beyond Reasonable Doubt, I think, okay. Sorry. Oh, chip off. Okay. No, I think journalistically, when I'm pitching an idea to, my bosses or whoever might commission the thing, it's more a case of thinking, okay, where does this story go? Who are the characters that we're going to meet? Where's the kind of compelling aspect of it? But you need a few kind of twists and turns and curveballs and unlikely happenings and stuff like that. And I think that's why, you know, the story of The Staircase and Beyond Reasonable Doubt has got that in spades, you know.
The Pilot Light TV Festival takes place in Manchester every year. I went along to a panel discussion on the ethics of true crime. One of the panellists, comedian Rachel Fairburn, presents the all-killer, no-filler true crime podcast.
I don't think it is a new phenomenon. I think it's always been there. I think, I mean, if you go right all the way back to, say, when people used to go and watch public executions for entertainment, people have always been interested in grim things. People have always been fascinated by murders and things like that. I have noticed. I think sort of the audience that we tend to have is, I'd say, 80% female, and from the ages of, say, 25 to sort of mid-50s maybe. There's quite a wide age range.
I was really interested in why Rachel thinks her audience is mainly female. It seems I wasn't the only one, as another member of the audience also asked her about this in the panel's question and answer session.
Why there's such a massive female audience for like true crime and fiction?
I've got a theory about this, and if I'm wrong, please stop me. So, I think, from when you're a woman, from being very young, you're told, be careful when you go out, don't do this, make sure you ring us when you get home, keep safe, don't talk to strangers, watch out, if you get a taxi instead of a bus. We're constantly told to look after our safety, and I don't know, statistically, we don't really commit murders in the same way men do. I mean, there's far fewer female serial killers than there are male. I'm not saying that women don't serial kill, because they do, but usually it's with a partner, or it's quite rare if they do. And I think it's something that's far removed from being female, I think, and I think that's maybe why it fascinates us. But I do think it's that thing that it's, from being young, it's always been at the back of your mind, your safety is always at the back of your mind, and you're constantly thinking.
After the event, I managed to grab 5 minutes with another of the panellists, UK True Crime Podcast's Adam Lloyd.
Hello and welcome to episode 105 of the UK True Crime Weekly podcast. I'm Adam. Thank you so much.
He told me that his audience is actually predominantly male.
But I noticed, I was really surprised by Rachel's answer. Mine certainly isn't strong. Mine is 60% male, 40% female, last time I looked. So that's quite unusual, isn't it? Because there are normally more female people.
The victim's gender isn't a concern to Adam when he's choosing which crimes to cover for the podcast.
Yes, I am super conscious of finding cases where it is a man kills woman. Because the easy cases to do, like I said there, in our short time this week, quickly found an easy case, man kills woman. So it's man kills woman, easy cases.
Adam says that the most popular episode of his podcast featured a female escort killing her controlling boyfriend with an axe.
Today's story involves a sauna in Rochdale, risk-taking, controlling behaviour, sex work, dogging, and an axe.
What's your favourite podcast?
So I listened to one, I think it's called just True Crime UK. It's by a guy called like Andy or something, I can't remember.
Adam Lloyd.
Adam Lloyd, yes.
Yeah, I've interviewed him for this.
No way!
Yeah.
No!
Uh-huh.
Oh my God, have you actually?
Yeah.
That is so insane.
Yeah.
Yes. I love that podcast. So I listened to his podcast, which I really enjoy. And at first I was like listening to it and I was like, I feel a bit like weird listening to it, because obviously it's just him and he doesn't have any like other interviews or any other input. It's just like, it's like their story, like a very gruesome bedtime story being read to you. But I find it really interesting because it's the parts of, like everyone knows the famous ones, you know, the Ted Bundy, Harold Shipman. With his podcast, it is more kind of, like I found out about so many things that haven't even been in the news, that have been so horrific that they've not even been in the news, or they've happened to someone that maybe society doesn't care about.
I find case file really interesting, maybe because it's like an anonymous person, like you've no idea who's doing it. It's done in such a good way that if there is certain issues that come up, there's like, if you need help, you can speak to this organisation and blah, blah, blah. I think it's done really, really well.
Not far from the shining steel of Media City is Salford University. I've come to speak to Dr. Abby Bentham to get a more academic perspective on the female relationship with true crime.
So I'm Dr. Abby Bentham. I'm a lecturer in English and Theatre at the University of Salford, and I've been interested in true crime for as long as I can remember, really. I think growing up as a child in the 80s, when the Moors murders were still very much in the news, you couldn't go a day really without seeing a tabloid splash on one of the killers.
Dr. Bentham's interest in true crime has also led her to look at the reasons it resonates with women.
Hybristophilia, where women fall in love with these men. And obviously, they're not really boyfriend material. And I think there's a lot going on there. There's, there's that adage that nice girls like bad boys, which I've got lots of issues with as a feminist. An incarcerated man on death row becomes a very safe and acceptable choice as a love interest or a love object, because obviously he can't hurt you. You know where he is. He's not going off with other women. He's not doing anything he shouldn't be doing because he's in that little cell. And then there are also all these tropes around, sort of women wanting to fix people and seeing the sort of damaged little boy within this necrophiliac, murderous rapist. So there's all sorts of strange things going on.
True crime fan Laura also touched upon this when we spoke.
And there's a lot of people who talk about how they're so sexually attracted to Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy confessed to killing at least 30 women in the 1970s. The fact that he was attractive and charming not only allowed him to gain his victims' trust, but undoubtedly helped him to avoid suspicion for years.
Ted Bundy is a bad man. He's a terrible human being, and there is this whole community of people who are sexually attracted to serial killers and whatever. They are really charming. Obviously, that's how Ted Bundy murdered so many women and attacked so many women. He is incredibly charming. But he's still tapped. There's something really wrong there.
I think more generally, women and true crime, a lot of it, the studies seem to show that a lot of it's down to safety. We're told from being little girls not to talk to strange men, not to walk down alleys, to toe the line, do as we're told, and then nothing bad will happen to us. So engaging with that kind of material, in a way it's about arming ourselves. If we can read about survivors, then we know how to get away. Or if we read about victims, then we read not what to do.
Dr. Bentham notes that actually, statistically, it's men who are usually the victims of crime.
On a sort of day-to-day basis, although it's women who are told not to walk out on their own after dark, it's statistically, you're more likely to get involved in an incident if you're a male. It's actually quite rare for things to happen to women. But yeah, absolutely. I would say that there's a disproportionate focus on the sort of dead girl kind of trope. And in part, this is because it reflects real life. In part, it's because it sells.
A 2013 study found that globally, nearly 78% of homicide victims are men. So there is a possibility that true crime media skews our perceptions and potentially makes women feel more at risk than they really are. So why does Dr. Bentham think that women affiliate with true crime?
Well, I think there's probably something vicarious going on there as well. So we can experience the crime, these things that our mothers have referred to quite obliquely. There's lots of talk about bad men and stranger danger, but you don't want to frighten your children, so you don't go into the, sort of the nitty-gritty. So there's a degree of sort of mystery, mystique even around that. So we can explore these things more fully through the safety of the frame of the TV screen or the book or, the headphones for the podcast. So we can find out in detail what it is we're being warned about, but we're not getting hurt because we've got that, sort of safe distance.
And I don't know, this might be sort of going out on a whim, but if women have always been sort of told, watch out for dangers through your life on the streets at the hands of men, whatever it might be, to sort of be able to view that in a kind of, or listen to that in a vicarious sense and sort of see the conclusion of it, you wonder whether that sort of allows them to sort of confront that, but in a vicarious way and in a kind of safe way, you know?
Chris talks about how true crime podcast listeners are forming online communities.
You sort of become part of other people's wider conversations on social media, and, you know, there's obviously a great thing of these days is people sharing ideas of podcasts and whatever, you know, recommendations and stuff, and you can quite often be tagged into those, and you realise quite how many people are sharing different ideas of related kind of podcasts.
I used the Facebook group for Adam's UK True Crime podcast to connect with female fans. I met with Dr. Kathryn Hughes, whose passion for true crime actually led her into her career.
My name's Kathryn Hughes. I'm an investigative psychologist, which not really many people know what an investigative psychologist is. So we say criminal psychologist. It's applying the study of psychology to all areas of crime and criminal activity. I think the fascination that people could behave so violently and commit such abhorrent acts. I wanted to know more, to find out more. What was it about these people that made them want to commit violent crimes or serial killings and things like that? I had always had a fascination with crime, and I used to be a motorcycle instructor, and unfortunately I had an accident which meant that I couldn't do that job anymore. So the interest was already there, so then I got the opportunity to look into it further, you know, and to go in and study it. Now, at that time, I mean, we're talking about 18 years ago, maybe. At that time, there wasn't as much information online. Not everybody had a computer. So as time has gone on, that fascination is still there, besides the work-related activities that I do. And yeah, I find myself consuming more and more of it because more of it's available.
Dr. Hughes founded Crime Psych, which runs courses on criminal psychology. So the people that do these Crime Psych courses, what's their gender usually? Is it an even split, or does it lean towards one gender?
No, it's about 90% female. When I build up advertisements and things like that, my target demographic is women between the ages of 30 and 50. They're the main people who are interested in what I've got to say. There are men as well, you know, don't get me wrong, and there are women of all different ages, but they make up the main bulk of people who want to learn and find out more.
Where do you think the true crime industry is headed in the future?
I think sooner or later, people may very well realise that not all of the information which is available is of quality. And so I think the industry will always be there, but the consumers will be more selective about who they listen to, what they read, and where they get their information from.
So I think that shift towards a more sort of investigative format is probably going to continue to develop. You know, we've got things like Making a Murderer or the Keepers. You know, there are Facebook groups working right now to try and solve the murder of Kathy Sesnick. Yeah, how long it will last, who knows? There must come a saturation point, but it doesn't feel like we're there yet.
Where do you think the industry is headed in terms of true crime? Do you think we're just going to see more of these podcasts and TV series, or do you think eventually it's going to come to sort of a saturation point?
There's probably a possibility that it could come to saturation, and I think you'll get to a point where someone will have like just the one podcast that you like really, really enjoy, and the cream will rise to the top sort of thing. Like, I think people do kind of dip in and out of these kind of mediums very easily, and it is quite volatile. Like, you know, the numbers will fluctuate quite a lot, but I think it'll just push people to be better at what they do, and they'll have to work harder, they'll have to research a lot more, like, going forward, and people will have to stand up for what they do. It won't just be, I'm a little bit interested in true crime, so I did it. Like, it needs to be strong, to the point, with your sources, where you got it from, and all that. Like, I think there'll need to be more accountability.
So what do these true crime fans want to see from the genre in the future?
Perhaps let's talk about the victims or the survivors of the crime, because these women have been through such horrific acts. They need to be given more consideration, and they need to be celebrated for going through that, surviving it and overcoming, and going on, in most cases, to live a normal life. And so when it comes to the fascination with true crime and people who are involved in crime, I think as society we do need to give consideration to the victims and to families of victims as well. Who has ever talked about the families of the victims and what devastation that causes?
I think that, like we were talking before about like the victims and things like that. I think that the reason I like Adam Lloyd's podcast is because he does pay attention to who the victim was. They're not just a faceless figure who's had this awful thing happen to them. They there's actually a bit of background about them. I think it'd be a more interesting take if you actually spoke to the victim's brother or the victim's mother or the victim's neighbour and actually spoke to them and said, well, actually, what were they just like? And I think that then we'd have a bit more of an empathy, I suppose you might say, with the victim. Empathy is the wrong word because we already have empathy with them, but just a bit more of an understanding of who they are and a bit more of an appreciation of the fact that they had a life. They're not just the victim.
But is the basis for true crime the fascination with the killers themselves?
I think now in this day and age where we have advanced quite a lot, people are calling out that kind of weird mentality of making a celebrity out of it, and putting them on this kind of a pedestal, and they are super good looking and blah, blah, blah. Like, we do need to kind of take a step back and understand that they're in this situation for a reason. Like they have done something really terrible on such a massive scale. But hindsight is just a wonderful thing, isn't it? We are a very different society now than we were then, which I think is always quite interesting.
Saying that though, I mean, this year there's been Zac Efron has played Ted Bundy and he's had his own documentary on Netflix. So do you think really that we are heading that way where we're going to put more focus on victims, or do you think that's just sort of something that we say but really that interest is always there?
Yeah, you've got a point, to be fair. Like, it's all well and good me saying like, oh, I care about like the victim and stuff, but I'm like one person out of how many. Like, you're absolutely right. Like, that massive focus on Ted Bundy for a while, I think you're trying to dig into like who he was and how he was able to do what he could do. But yeah, I think Ted Bundy is like a very specific case, but because of he was a good looking man, and that's how you kind of like can get away with it. But I mean, hopefully we can start to look at it in a different light and we can raise awareness of certain situations, like if this were to continue. But obviously it's a different time, we've a lot more at our disposal. So I don't know, hopefully.
Coming back to Serial, I wonder if it's that investigative nature and the fact that the podcast had an impact on Adnan Syed's case that made it so popular.
Podcasts are great because you can listen to it when you're doing other things, driving along or whatever, which I think is really great for people and probably a big part of why they've really taken off. And Netflix, I don't think we can underestimate the impact of making a murderer. And I think what's really interesting about that and things like the Central Park 5, that they're really challenging the structures of justice. So, asking, was justice served? Were we right to put our trust in these institutions?
But what are the implications of these types of podcasts and series on our society?
I just think that it's difficult. I don't think that people realise that so many things that we watch are so heavily edited. You're not actually in that courtroom, and you're not actually, I know that I like to think I am, and you probably think that you are, but we're not actually experts. So I think that it will be very frustrating for people who are actually qualified in these areas. And also times change, you look back, not that long ago, and society's views on all different things, whether it's, sex and prostitution, people not caring about, a prostitute being killed if you're, on the jury. I think that again is changing, where people are being more aware and being like, well, actually, it doesn't matter, that woman or that person still deserves to have their case heard and for that person to go to jail for it.
I'm interested to know how the violence against women portrayed in the true crime genre affects Maz and Laura.
Well, to me, it's like you need to know your enemy. So I like to watch it from that point of view, know what we're up against in the world. I do think that obviously I don't watch Game of Thrones, which might sound ridiculous to many people, but I don't watch Game of Thrones because of the violence against women. I find it, very distressing, and I find it very hard to watch and enjoy. You know, I have a very stressful life and a very stressful job. And when I finish my day, the last thing I want to do is see anything even more distressing or that's going to upset me. I just want something that's easy to watch. But it's funny because like true crime documentaries or podcasts and those kinds of things, it is actually, for me, it's kind of an escape. And even though I am like hearing about these awful things happening to women, they're talking about it in a respectful manner. I think that therefore I feel a bit more comfortable maybe listening about it.
It doesn't. I think you can become numb to these kind of situations, like the more you hear about it. But then that being said, I listened to an episode recently about a domestic violence victim. I'm talking about how it starts off in little things and their partner apologizes up to like beating the living life out of them. It is terrifying, and it's really difficult to hear. I do find it quite difficult sometimes, but to an extent I think I am a little bit numb to it, which is really quite sad. And I find that about like a lot of sort of tragedies. Like I am quite interested in serial killers and like mass murders and stuff. Like I've watched Bowling for Columbine and found it really interesting. And I think that is a bit of a concern that we'll just become too accustomed to how these things are. Like with shootings and stuff in America, we just see a number and we're like, oh, that's sad. Like there isn't any real shock behind it anymore. And I think that's maybe the case for crimes against women because they're just such a current theme when it comes to true crime.
Yeah, like I said before as well, it's also about, you know, they shouldn't die in vain. There should be attention given to what happened to them because it is an important thing that we need to pay attention to in society and see how we can prevent it happening in future.
Every woman is different, and there's no one reason why women love true crime. There's an obvious fascination with how people can commit these acts, and perhaps it even offers women a chance to experience a sense of danger without actually having to expose themselves to it. With the new age of podcasting, there are countless opportunities to both hear and tell new true crime stories. But it's clear that in the future, these stories need to push the focus away from criminals and onto the victims themselves. This documentary was researched, produced and presented by me, Sian McGuinness.